Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Caitlin and I upload a whole bunch of different types of videos on this channel, mainly surrounding true crime and psychological cases, as well as a little bit of fashion and lifestyle sprinkled in where I can. Now today I'm back discussing an unsolved case, and today we're going to be discussing the case of Molly BISH. Before I get into the case, I'm just going to put in my usual disclaimer that I'm not trying to claim to be an expert in any of the cases that I cover, including this one. I am simply covering the facts that I can find myself through researching online, so obviously not necessarily everything about every case is accessible to me, so I'm not trying to offend anyone or do anyone an injustice. If I mispronounce something, forget something, get something wrong, I apologise sincerely, and feel free to, in a nice way preferably, correct me in the comments below. And due to the nature of the content that I create, they are not always going to be the most pleasant to hear. Most of the cases I discuss are quite upsetting and distressing and potentially quite graphic, so if that sounds like something that you're not necessarily going to be able to sit through, then this content probably isn't for you. So if you want to hear about the case of Molly BISH, keep on watching and we shall just get started. Molly Ann BISH was born on August 2nd, 1983. And in the year of 2000, Molly BISH was your typical 16-year-old girl living in a place called Warren in Massachusetts. She was a bright and driven young woman who had recently started working as a lifeguard in her local lake pond area called Comins Pond in Warren. One particular day, Molly's mother, her name was Maggie BISH, she drove her to the pond to drop her off for her shift as she usually did. As they pulled up, Maggie BISH noticed a car was already parked there. It was a white sedan, and inside she saw a Caucasian male with a moustache, and she noticed this man because it was kind of out of the ordinary. There was already someone in this parking space. While this had been a bit strange enough for her to at that time kind of take notice it was namely because she'd never seen the man or nor the car before, but obviously she didn't know everyone in town and it was a public space, so at that point she didn't particularly have any reason to be concerned. And just because you see a person sat in a car park in a public space obviously doesn't really cause any reason for concern. So she continued to drop her daughter off at her spot in the pond where she is supposed to be posted for her lifeguarding duty, and she drove home. And this was their routine. They had done this for the last week since Molly had started her job as a lifeguard. On June 27th, 2000, the morning was the same as it had been for the last week since Molly had started her position, with her heading to work, Maggie dropping her off work at the pond. However, on this day, Maggie received a phone call that she was not expecting at all. The local police had rung her out of concern for the fact that there was no one at the lifeguard post where Molly was supposed to be working at the lake that day, where Maggie had dropped her off earlier in the morning. Maggie found herself immediately rushing to Molly's lifeguard post. She drove over there as quickly as she could, but only to find her shoes and her packed lunch and no sign of Molly. Molly BISH was officially missing. A huge search ensued in hopes of finding any sign of 16-year-old Molly, so much so that it was actually reported as the largest and most expensive missing person search in Massachusetts. However, nearly 3 years down the line, there remained no sign of Molly BISH. And then on June the 9th, 2003, things took a turn for the worse. A hunter had been walking through a wooded area in Whiskey Hill in Palmer, Massachusetts, when he came across what he would later realise was a blue spotted bathing suit, and this finding was just 5 miles away from Molly BISH's family home. This blue spotted bathing suit actually matched the one that Molly was known to be wearing on the day that she disappeared. The hunter was familiar with Molly's case, as it had been such a massive search in the area that kind of everyone knew of the case. Everyone had been on the hunt for Molly BISH, and so he was aware of the finding and its potential relevance to Molly's case, so he rang up the police to inform them of what he found and where he'd found it. It is worth noting, however, I have written here that some sources claim that the hunter actually found the bathing suit a few months beforehand, so in winter of 2002, but hadn't immediately made the connection, and it wasn't until the following year, so mid-2003, that he'd mentioned it to a friend who had kind of made the link between that and Molly BISH's case, and so that was when they rang the police and came across the discovery. So there's a bit of kind of miscommunication there amongst sources. I'm not entirely sure which one is correct, but either way, this hunter had stumbled across Molly BISH's bathing suit. Nonetheless, local police carried out a very thorough search of the wooded area where the hunter found the bathing suit. And it was on this day, on June the 9th, 2003, that Molly's body was found in Parma, around 5 miles from her family home, just as I said. There really isn't a lot of information released publicly about the condition that Molly's remains were found in or what they believed had happened to her, so there's not really much I can discuss there. If you know a little bit more information about this case, maybe if you're a little bit closer to it, then feel free to add that into the comments. But I'm just going to move on now to the suspect, because that is kind of the largest portion of this case. There have been a number of people listed as suspects and just investigated in general in relation to the investigation surrounding the death of Molly BISH. Now, as I'm sure you can imagine, one of the most kind of prominent leads that they had at the time was the unknown man that Maggie BISH had spotted the day of her disappearance, hanging around outside of where Molly was supposed to be lifeguarding at her post. And there were also 2 employees who were working at the pond the same time that Molly was, who on separate occasions claimed to have seen a man matching the same description. So the employees and Maggie BISH were able to provide like a composite sketch of the man that they'd seen. Like I said, they appeared to kind of match, and this was one of the main leads that they had. They were kind of ideally looking for this man to see if he had any involvement whatsoever, but so far all they had to go on was this composite sketch. One of the earliest suspects in the case was a man in Connecticut who was in the process of being arrested for an attempted kidnapping charge, who investigators believe that may have kind of had some involvement in Molly BISH's disappearance. And this was in the year 2005. However, to my knowledge, he was kind of investigated, he was questioned and ultimately ruled out, so he was likely dismissed because nothing else was mentioned about this unidentified suspect. Rodney Stranger was a suspect that the police came across in the year of 2009 during their investigation. He was a man at that point who was living in Florida, who was being convicted for the murder of Crystal Morrison, who was his girlfriend. It is known that at the time of Molly's disappearance and death, he was actually living in a place called Southbridge in Massachusetts, not far from Warren at all, so very close to where Molly's case had taken place. And it was very, very shortly after Molly's disappearance that he decided to relocate to Florida. And it's also known that at the time of his residence in Massachusetts, he had access to a white car very similar to the one that was spotted by the eyewitnesses of the unidentified man hanging around in the pond. And he was also known to frequent the woods where Molly's remains were found, allegedly for fishing and hunting purposes. To add to all of this suspicion, obviously all of those facts do make him look very, very likely suspect. He does also match the description provided by Maggie BISH about the unidentified man sat in the white sedan outside the pond on the day of Molly's disappearance. Rodney Stranger was investigated thoroughly in relation to Molly's case, but as well as another case that took place in 1993, so the death of a girl named Holly, I apologise if I mispronounce this, Holly Piranian, who died in Southbridge, Massachusetts in 1993. There was never any conclusive evidence against Rodney Stranger in relation to either case, and then a development in the case of Holly actually led to another man being a suspect. So kind of the investigations moved on from Rodney Stranger. I'm not entirely sure whether they conclusively drew a line under it, or if they kind of said we can't conclusively say whether he had any involvement as of yet. Another suspect in the case was a man named Gerald Battistoni. He had been an informant for something called the Eastern Hampton County Narcotics Task Force, and then in 2011 he was publicly announced as a suspect in Molly BISH's case. And at this point he was actually already in prison for the rape of a teenage girl in the 1990s. It is known that he was at the time in the area where Molly's case took place, as well as having an appearance very, very similar to the description provided by Maggie BISH. When he learned that he'd been listed as a suspect in Molly's case, he actually attempted to end his life while he was in prison. However, this attempt failed, but he did actually die in 2014, once again leaving the case open, as they were never able to conclusively link him to the case. Molly's sister hired a private investigator to search the woods in which her remains were found, attempting to find perhaps any more evidence that maybe wasn't found initially when the case first occurred. And this actually led to the discovery of a pair of plaid boxer shorts that had been buried beneath, I think, like a log or a trunk that hadn't initially been found. And they were very, very similar to the ones that Molly was believed to have been wearing over her swimming costume on the day that she disappeared. So these were sent obviously to investigators to be tested to see if there was any new information they can gather from this evidence. So according to some sources, this is where things kind of start getting a bit patchy between sources. In addition to her swimming costume, only actually 26 of her bones were discovered in the woods. So there was likely a lot more further evidence that could be discovered in the woodland area that they have been unable to find as of yet. Obviously it's quite difficult to search such a large woodland area when you're looking, well, you don't really know what you're looking for. So yeah, there's a lot still to be found in this case. 2 years later, investigators actually announced that the DNA evidence that they had originally collected were being retested in the hopes of finding something new because of all of the more recent DNA matching technology advancements that have been made, to see if they could maybe find something new with these advancements and developments in the technology. And then in June of 2017, it was announced that investigators had found what they called compelling evidence in Molly's case. Whatever this evidence was, it actually led to the belief that a car potentially used in Molly's disappearance was buried in a place called West Brookfield Campground. Authorities used ground penetrating radar in hopes of kind of isolating the areas in which they needed to kind of examine further in hopes of finding any new evidence. And in addition to this, a new person of interest was listed in the case as a result, as they lived in the campground at the time of Molly's disappearance. The man had owned a car which was a white Buck LeSabre, which is very similar to the car that was spotted by Maggie BISH, who she described it as a white sedan. It's obviously a very similar type of car, very easily maybe mistaken if you'd only glanced at it or if you didn't know cars very well. So this kind of all pointed towards a new person of interest. And at this point, it becomes kind of difficult to be able to decipher any official updates in Molly's case. To my knowledge, there have been no significant arrests or updates, only suspects and leads and continuing investigations. From what I could tell, things are still up in the air. There has not been anything official released, but they are still searching, which is obviously good news for Molly's case. So that is everything I have to discuss today. Let me know your thoughts down below. Like I said, this one, from my research, it was kind of hard to isolate what was an official update or official claim and what wasn't, you know, what was speculation and what was non-credible sources. So I apologise for things not being too definitive. I did the best I could. But I really genuinely hope, for Molly's sake and for Molly's family's sake, that there are some updates soon in this case, because this is awful and they definitely deserve some justice and some answers. So let me know your thoughts down below, as well as some other case requests if you have anything specific you'd like me to research. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and I will see you guys soon for another video. Thanks for watching. Bye.